War in the Middle Ages wasn't noble, it was chaos in steel. It was the roar of battle, the clatter of armor, and the sickening crunch of bone beneath iron. We remember swords, axes, and arrows, but there was one weapon no knight wanted to face. A weapon not spoken of with pride, but whispered about with dread. It didn't follow rules, it broke them. It ignored armor, shattered shields, and punished hesitation. A weapon feared not because it was elegant, but because it was wild, brutal, and alive in a fighter's hands. The military flail, rare, misunderstood, but unforgettable. In this video, we step into the storm of medieval war to uncover the truth of this terrifying weapon. If you love forgotten stories of history's darkest tools, subscribe now. Like this video to keep the steel ringing, and join us in the fight to remember what history tried to bury. War was not glorious in those days, it was not poetry or pride. It was a roar of iron screams, bone breaking beneath mailed fists, and breath stolen by sudden fear. In those dark centuries of swords, men did not fight to impress. They fought to live another night, to hold ground, protect their kin, to leave their bodies mostly whole. And while knights rode in shining steel, while banners danced on winds of hope, while prayers whispered behind helmets, not all weapons bowed to honor, not all weapons sang like swords. There was one that snarled instead, that moved with a serpent's madness, that slipped past every noble line, and left even the bold unsure a weapon not remembered right, the flail, the military flail. Not a farmer's tool for threshing, but a chain, born beast of chaos, forged to strike where steel forgot. It was no heirloom passed with pride, no jewel on a rich man's wall. It was feared in the fighter's hand, and whispered in the dark of tents, as bruised men remembered its bite. It did not sing like a sword, it hissed, it cracked, it crashed through bone, a hardwood shaft in calloused hands, a chain that spun like wrath itself, and a head iron, heavy, cruel. Some had spikes, some did not need them. The weight alone could end a breath. Where armor met at joint or gap, the flail found purchase like a fang, delivering death without elegance. Its motion defied every rule. It bent like smoke, then struck like stone. A sword followed a master's plan, a flail danced to no such rhythm, but carved its own from battlefield screams. When shields were raised in noble form, the flail ignored them with disdain. It whipped around, struck temple's edge, or hammered down on knee or groin, mocking the art of perfect stance. A parry failed it more often. For how do you stop a blur of steel on living chain, that spins and weaves like storm, wrung wind, then bites before you find your breath? Its strength was not in edge or thrust, it struck with pure momentum's curse. When swung with all the strength of war, it dented helms, cracked ribs beneath, and left proud men gasping in blood. And worst of all, worst beyond pain, was its utter disregard for plan. Fighters trained for cuts and counters, for angles, timing, dance and steps, not for madness wrapped in chain. When two forces clashed in fury, when lines dissolved in panic's grasp, when castle halls ran red with cries, it was not the sword they feared. It was the flail's howling descent. Even among allies it was risk. The flail did not halt at borders. It struck too wide, it curved too far, it crushed the foe, and friend as well unless its wielder held command. That is why it was so rare. That is why it haunts, not glows, because few dared to wield such power, and fewer still lived long with it, but those who did, those men were feared. Knights, men trained in rigid code, whose armor cost a farmer's life, who wore their lineage on their chests, often met their match not in rank, but in a peasant's flail, born swing, because the flail did not care much. It did not respect gold or cloth, it did not tremble before rank. It crashed through creed and shattered pride, a hammer of God's blind justice. A knight could block a pike or blade, predict the thrust, absorb the blow. But flails refused to march in line. They circled, darted, slammed from sides, and punished even perfect form. A flail strike to the armoured chest would not pierce, but it would crush. It would cave in the mail and plate, drive air from lungs and twist the spine. A knight stood, then staggered, then fell, and where joints met at armpit bend beneath the helm, behind the knee the flail found openings none saw. It kissed those gaps with fatal weight and made armour feel like paper. It made war lose its rhythm too, because war had become like dance. Even chaos had order's rules, but the flail refused all rhythm. It disrupted breath, broke the beat. To fight against it was a gamble. You hoped to strike before it moved. You prayed its wielder missed the arc. But if he knew the weapon well, your shield might soon be in your teeth. And even then, some still disbelieved. Histories left the flail in shadows. Too wild, too rare, too uncontrolled. Not worthy of a knight's clean tale, yet stories lingered in broken bones. You see, few wanted to write it down, because it did not fit the myth. A weapon of the mud and sweat, not the court or polished hall. But soldiers whispered what they knew. Some held scars from flail, born strikes. Some never walked quite right again. Some stared too long at spinning chains, remembering what chaos could do when swung by wrath in human hands. Flails were not mass-issued arms. They were not the pride of armies. But in Central Europe, East and South, where siege and ally fought for space, they showed themselves in blood and noise. Some flails rode upon horseback too short, handled beasts of pure assault. No need to aim with perfect grace, just swing where clustered foes would crowd, and watch them fall like stalks at harvest. Others fought in towers and keeps, where stairways turned to butchers' rooms. There, where pikes were far too long, and swords too slow to counterturn, the flail ruled by sheer command. A swing around a wall's sharp edge, a crack through doorways barely wide, and suddenly the line was breached. The soldier's mind broke just as fast as bones beneath the swinging weight. And all of this, the fear, the truth did not live in songs or scrolls, because this weapon did not charm. It was not graceful, not adorned. It was too close to war's true face. No beauty in its movement, none. Just violence in its rawest form. And history, like man, prefers to soften what cannot be tamed, to forget what leaves no glory. And so the flail was buried deep beneath the tales of noble steel, beneath the myths of chosen men. But it did not vanish with ease. It remained, if only in fear. Long after flintlocks ruled the field, when gunpowder tore through valour, when knights gave way to rows of fire, the ghost of flails still lingered there. In tales the old men dared not tell, because it was not about the chain, nor even the iron in the head. It was what it meant in war, a weapon that made order break, a weapon no armour could ignore. The flail reminded men too much that war is not a tale of rules, not always lines or planned advance. Sometimes it is screaming chaos, and chaos loves a spinning chain. No training saved you from its wrath, no honor guarded you from pain, and once you saw it in full swing, with blood still dripping from the head, you prayed the chain did not turn back. For sometimes it struck the wielder too. It did not love, it had no side, and wielding it was no soft task. It asked for strength, for endless will, and nerves like stone, lest it rebel. That is why it was so rare. That is why it was so feared, and why, though time erased its name, the memory remained like bruises hidden deep beneath the skin. The flail did not conquer kingdoms, it did not win the holy war. But in alleys and castle halls, in fog-drenched fields and wooden walls, it left its mark with every blow. The knight, for all his polished pride, would shake before a peasant's swing, because nothing taught in noble courts prepared the mind for one who fights with chaos bound in chain and weight. So when you picture medieval war, do not paint just banners bright. Remember too the spinning flail, and the way it moved without song like thunder given human form. It had no anthem, bore no crest. But still it ruled the place where breath was traded like a coin each hour, and where the brave fell all the same to what they could not understand. The flail did not ask for glory, it simply broke whatever it touched. And that in war was power pure, the kind that stories try to hide, the kind that history lets rust, but rust still cuts if shaped just right, and echoes still scream in the steel. So listen close, in the clash of war you might still hear the whispering chain, and feel the air shift just before a nameless weapon finds your spine. Not every weapon wins in song. Some are buried under silence too wild, too true, too much like war. The flail was one of those few, born not for pride but for fear, and fear, once born, does not forget. If this story stirred something deep, if it brought the clang of iron near, then let it ring across your screen. Like, subscribe, and ride with us again. The flail may rest in history's grave, but its chain still swings in shadowed tales. Until next time, stay sharp, stay bold, and never turn your back on chaos.